Welcome to another episode of Really 007, and thank you so much for joining us again. This would be the usual point in the show where we point you in the direction of all the places that you can find us online, on social media, etc. But because of this recording being our immediate reaction to the big news about Amazon MGM taking full control of the franchise, we are going to shoot through this bit. And Math, I'm going to challenge you to rattle off all our social media handles really quickly for everyone to hear. What can you remember?
Look us up at Really 007 Pod or something. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Yeah, is that it?
Yeah.
Do we think so?
Well, they're
Really
obviously on
007
YouTube
Pod?
watching this, but
Yeah, YouTube, yeah.
All
Sorry.
right, you pass, and we're keeping the pace going. I hope you like that, Matthew. Yeah, anyway, this is a special kind of broadcast. It's actually episode 8 of our James Bond Will Return series. And we started this series 2 years ago, is that right?
Yeah.
Trying to kind of chart the journey of Bond 26. But even though this series is about Bond 26, do please check out all our other content. That's episodes, it's reviews, interviews with cast and crew, and we've got a lot of great features on behind the films as well, which are worth listening to, worth watching on YouTube. So do please bear those in mind and go and check them out. But tonight, today, wherever you're watching, well, it's about the surprising promise that we were left with at the end of No Time to Die that James Bond will return, and that's the name of this series. So far, we've had, and I tend to list these, and Matthew enjoys this. Number one, episode 1 was Privileged Position. Episode 2, Eon and Amazon. I mean, this is nearly 2 years ago, bear in mind. We got a bit excited. Episode 3, we did non-negotiables. Episode 4, we had marketing. Episode 5, we talked about the director we might like. Episode 6, we had the music. It was all getting pretty exciting. And then the last episode we recorded, episode 7, was called Impasse because we were responding to the news that things weren't all rosy behind the scenes. So that was our last episode. But we are up to episode 8. So you're listening to episode 8, you're watching episode 8. And we're calling this one A New Era, following the big news that's come out. And that big news is about a huge handover in power on the production side of the James Bond franchise. Before we do progress with our own interpretations of and how we receive the news, I'm going to read through the statement that was released today through the official James Bond social media pages. Okay, so it had a nice little image of all the actors, and then it said beneath, Amazon MGM Studios, Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli today announced that they have formed a new joint venture to house the James Bond intellectual property rights, and these parties will remain co-owners of the franchise. Under the terms of the new venture, Amazon MGM Studios will gain creative control of the James Bond franchise following closing of the transaction. Since its theatrical introduction over 60 years ago, James Bond has been one of the most iconic characters in filmed entertainment, said Mike Hopkins, head of Prime Video and Amazon MGM Studios. We are grateful to the late Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman for bringing James Bond to movie theatres around the world, and to Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli for their unyielding dedication and their role in continuing the legacy of the franchise that is cherished by legions of fans worldwide. We are honoured to continue this treasured heritage and look forward to ushering in the next phase of the legendary 007 for audiences around the world. And then this is a quote from Wilson. With my 007 career spanning nearly 60 incredible years, I am stepping back from producing the James Bond films to focus on art and charitable projects. Therefore, Barbara and I agree, it is time for our trusted partner, Amazon MGM Studios, to lead James Bond into the future, said Wilson. And then Barbara Broccoli provided the following quote. My life has been dedicated to maintaining and building upon the extraordinary legacy that was handed to Michael and me by our father, producer Cubby Broccoli. I've had the honour of working closely with 4 of the tremendously talented actors who have played 007 and thousands of wonderful artists within the industry. With the conclusion of No Time to Die and Michael retiring from the films, I feel it is time to focus on my other projects, commented Broccoli. In 2022, Amazon acquired MGM, including a vast catalogue with more than 4,000 films and 17,000 TV shows. Since the MGM acquisition, Amazon has held the rights to distribute all of the James Bond films, and as a result of this transaction, will have creative control over future productions. That's the statement that kind of circulated WhatsApp groups. It came as a surprise. I came to find it on my phone about 2 hours late, and by which time there were hundreds upon hundreds of messages. I mean, it's a huge development, not just for Bond 26. Obviously, the point of this series, James Bond will return, is all about Bond 26. But actually, today's news goes way beyond Bond 26. It's really significant for the future of the franchise. So there's so much to talk about. There's so much to take in. This relationship between Amazon, MGM, and Eon, it hasn't been easy to understand or follow. Like for me, it's there might be people who feel more able to understand it, but what exactly it's meant from the moment these guys came together, it's been pretty tricky to work out who's sharing the responsibility and who's collaborating with who. If I go back to that second episode that we had in this series, it's a good chance to introduce our first guest, who is in fact a good friend of the show, George Aldridge from Cinema Savvy. You'll see there, you'll hear him in a moment. How are you today, George, in general?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you for inviting me back on. And yeah, I think it was the second episode I was on for the series because I think I remember sat there saying, "Yeah, I'm optimistic to an extent about the future. Let's see what happens." And nothing's happened really until today.
That's right. I mean,
And
yeah,
none of us probably saw it coming today. I was just sat there working. I think my phone was in airplane mode. I was reading a great article about the downfall of a giant football club. I put it off airplane mode to share it around, and suddenly James Bond is now at Amazon. One of the biggest like IP. I don't even want to call it an IP because it sounds like a studio head, but it's probably one of the biggest film stories since Disney buying Star Wars. For me, at least, like take away studios like obviously Fox being bought, MGM being bought is massive, but individually, this is probably one of the biggest film stories in like since 2012 for me. So is history repeating itself? I don't know. I'm worried, but I'm excited to see what everyone else is thinking.
yeah. Well, what I'm referring to is episode two for the listeners, and it'll still be worth going back to. Where George joined us to talk about the relationship between Eon and Amazon. And you gave us great insight into what it could mean for their relationship and what it could entail. But I know you said it's come as a surprise. Did you ever consider this, George? Did you ever envisage that we'd be having a day like today where the relationship has broken or the relationship has changed? Was it ever in your mind?
Yes and no. I didn't see Barbara giving up, essentially. I thought this was going to be a Mexican standoff for a couple of years. Bracing myself for there being absolutely nothing, no 4K box set. Obviously, no, I don't know if anyone cared for that Amazon show. That was in the report from last year, but obviously we got the same casting rumors, Aaron Taylor Johnson. We then had some weird rumors with oh god, the guy from Challengers. But I just sat there thinking that nothing's going to happen for a while. So 6 weeks later for this today shocked me. It's still quite surprising. It's not the surprising that Amazon have ended up with all the rights. I just think it's how soon it is. Whether there's stuff that's gone on behind the scenes is probably like my biggest questions, i.e., I'll talk about it later, the Star Wars comparisons, but was there a handover? Is there anything in place for the future? They've, to Eon's credit and Bond as a property, they are very good at things not leaking to the public, unlike Marvel and like Star Wars and like DC and everything else. So I'm not optimistic that they've been doing stuff, but if there is, I'm not surprised if they've sort of quietly done a handover to them. But yeah, I think the timing of it is what's just strange. 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday, just it's happened. The what do they call it? The transactions closing, which makes me think there's more news to come as well when it does close.
You're right. It can't just be one singular handing over of power. There'll be loads that's gone on over the last few weeks that we don't know about, and obviously loads to follow. And like you speculate, I don't know how much we'll hear next, or whether we'll have another period of complete silence now for a while. But I mean, I suppose it's like all big significant news. You're never quite ready for it. It comes as a surprise, however it comes. We're privileged, though, to be joined by someone else for this as well. We've got two guests. We're very lucky. And our next guest is another friend of the show, and we're always glad to get his perspective on all things Bond. It's Steve Clamp. Steve, in one word, just to start with, in one word, tell me how you're feeling about this huge development. One word.
Hopeful.
Oh, I like it. And now you can elaborate.
I mean, initially, obviously I've got the worries. I've got the worries that it becomes a Disney Star Wars thing where they just becomes a cash cow and they milk it, and you end up with endless spin-offs. And what I think is so important to me for Bond is that it's an event. A Bond film comes out and it's an event, and I think that is why the films are still so. You can go back to the old films, the Connerys and the Moores. They're still kind of special when you see them on TV because they still have that event about them. They were a big event. Therefore, that sticks with them even as the films age. And I don't want it to become just stuff, episodes of this, and you can't really remember what there is because there's so many different things. I want it to be an event. Now, I am pretty sure as well that Amazon don't see it that way. I imagine that is perhaps why it didn't work with them and Barbara and Michael. I imagine they wanted to keep it as events and one-off films, and Amazon wanted a lot more. That's all I can guess at. But that doesn't mean that things get spoiled because you don't have to go the way Disney has. And by the way, I'm sure lots of people love all the Star Wars stuff, and good on you and great. But maybe we will get a spin-off series. Maybe it'll be Bond set in the 50s or the 60s, and it'll be a real thriller rather than an action type show, more of a darker. That could be one way to go. That could be interesting. And we still get the other timeline that is the spectacular movies that come out every 2, probably 3 years. I'd be perfectly happy with that if it was done well. And, it's easy to think without Barbara and without Michael, we're going to lose the magic of Bond. And they have done some amazing work over the years, and I thank them both so, so much. But equally, I'm not that keen on most of the Daniel Craig films. They've got really good bits, but they're not really my kind of Bond. That's fine. Millions of other people love them. So I shouldn't worry too much about, are Amazon going to do something a bit different? Because Barbara and Michael did something a bit different with the Daniel Craig era, and it was very successful, wasn't really for me. So let's see what Amazon do next. So at first, my initial thing is panic. But I think I'm beyond panic now. I've had, 3 or 4 hours to digest the news. And I'm actually hopeful, thinking, well, let's just see. Amazon, at the end of the day, Amazon want it to be a success, obviously, because it's a business. So they'd be stupid to not be very careful with something that is so important. And let's see where they go. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt for now. And that is why I am now feeling hopeful.
Nice, Steve. Oh, I'm wondering whether we should retitle the episode A New Hope then, if hopeful's the move. But
Yeah.
too many Star Wars comparisons.
Only if it was episode 4, it would be perfect.
Yeah. Right, Tom. I'm coming to you, Tom, just for some clarity. Not that you'll be able to know necessarily, but Amazon MGM are now in charge, and Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson's Eon is at an end with its journey and Bond. Is that right? Am I understanding this right? How do you understand it?
Yeah, I was going to ask anyone else the same question. It's slightly unclear just to the untrained eye. Now, George might know a bit more about the background and the financing and all that. It sounds to me like everything's the same on paper at the moment, but in terms of the creative control, that's the headline, isn't it? They both keep having the 50-50 split. Now, again, you've got to remember Eon are only one part of MGM, so it wasn't like Barbara and Michael had say on non-Bond, non-Eon properties anyway. It just seems to me the two were trying to do it together. Let's hold hands and go through this new phase of Bond. The things we will have been discussing over the last few years, they'll have been discussing behind the scenes, I think. Where do we go from here together? That leaked Wall Street Journal accounts has probably proven to be true. I think this proves that was likely to be true, and that they just couldn't see eye to eye on the future of the franchise. But I'm thinking that Barbara and Michael have no reason to give creative control, do they? They don't need the money because this, I don't think, is about the money. They don't get any more money or any less money. They are obviously getting on a little bit, although, Barbara's not too old. She's certainly got enough mileage to do another run, another actor's run. So I'm just a bit curious as to whether they have lost the buzz. And I know a few people have said that over the last few years because she couldn't get over Daniel leaving, which I'm sure he did intend to do with Spectre. And I think he sort of had to be begged back based on the story that he wanted. And then after that, and it's a very definite conclusion in the film and the franchise, I don't think they really had an idea of what was going to happen. Then Amazon come in and they know that we're going to have to consult with them. Maybe they're just a bit jiggered. They're having a great time, retire in semi-retirement. Barbara said, she wants to focus on her art and a charity and other films and things like that. It does need a heck of a lot of work, and she's probably sick to the back teeth of these last few years. People like me are criticizing and wondering what's going on when clearly stuff has been being attempted to go on. But I think as far as it goes, there's a couple of things that seem to have been lost in the article. One of them is that Barbara casually just says, "Well, Michael retired." So what? Like he's never officially retired. Everyone who I know went to the No Time to Die premiere. I think George went, didn't you? They all came back saying, "Well, that seemed like a goodbye speech from Michael," and I think it obviously was in all but name. But that would have been, there's no point announcing that while you're promoting the film because that would have detracted from that. So I understand that. So that's interesting. The fact that he and all the storylines in the press over the last few years have only been talking about Barbara, haven't they? Really, it's always Barbara and Barbara and Amazon and all that. It's never what does Michael think. But yeah, so I am like we've all said, a bit shocked that Barbara has left completely. Now they seem to be holding a little bit more weight than George Lucas did with Star Wars because he wasn't even a creative consultant, wasn't he? Executive producer. Whether they will still have that title. Now I know that, for instance, John Favreau, I think he just gets on the phone to George, isn't he? Like, am I allowed to do this? Can I do that? Which certainly wasn't the case early on. I might be wrong, George, but when they first started, they didn't really. No, I don't want you involved at all. They dismissed his ideas, which is their gift now that they own it. Uh, but I don't know whether going forward, whether it's Jennifer Salke or whoever is in charge of the creative process, will be like, we better get on the blower to Barbara and Michael. Let's just check whether we can do that. It's a little bit different to Star Wars, and I know we'll go on about that later because that's a really complicated, it's a whole world with hundreds of thousands of characters. This is like, well, you need to consult with the Fleming, I suppose. That would be the first port of call. So I'm very interested. If I had one word as well, it would be hopeful. Maybe excited as well because there's nothing that I've not seen anywhere that Amazon are saying, yes, this is what we want to do with it. We want to do everything that you guys don't want to do with it. This is all guesswork. This is all us speculating, and an element of the fandom are instantly, I can't stand this. Bond finished, Bond died, and it's well, we don't know that yet, do we? Bond is definitely continuing. That's another. Sorry, I'll go on. I'll finish soon. But
No, no.
one of the starting points I wanted to make is over the years there've been financial problems, of course, with the franchise. Harry Saltzman had to sell his share, didn't he, because he was in money trouble. Then you had the Danjak thing between License to Kill and GoldenEye that went on for years. So the fact that we're now being owned by Amazon means that's it. There's never going to be any money worries. It's never going to go bust. That's it now. Bond is going to be fine unless it's sold or whatever. So for me, that's a real weight off my shoulders in terms of that. And it will come down to the creativity. It's that word, isn't it? That's what all the debates will be about, and everyone's reaction videos and articles. It's all very presumptive about what they're going to do when we really don't know. And we'll go into it later, I'm sure. But Barbara and Michael have done a great job. We've got to say that. But they have made mistakes, and I think Amazon. We've just got to trust them a bit. They will make mistakes too, of course they will. And no one can ever be completely appeased with Bond content, as that word she hates and everyone should hate says it. But yeah, I'm hopeful and I'm excited, Harry.
Good. No, no. Again, I'm pleased to hear that you are hopeful, and it's it's strange because the responses have been mixed amongst Bond fandom, and even someone who's a casual Bond fan has messaged me today saying, what are your thoughts? In fact, when he messaged me, he's like, oh dear, this can't be good, kind of. I don't know what the neutral stance on this is, whether neutral film fans will be looking at this and thinking it's sad to see recognizable people and names making way for a huge behemoth like Amazon. So there'll be some kind of it'll be tinged with sadness definitely as a story. This split has existed for quite a while now in terms of direction on Bond. This isn't suddenly us being forced to think, oh, what do we want for the future or what do we like? Really, to my understanding, this split on the direction and the vision of Bond has been going on for quite a few years now, really. Even going back to when they were making these recent films, there's kind of a bit of a split in terms of like I say, the vision, but also creative control. We see directors being hired, fired, and all that, which is something that we didn't used to see. John, if I come to you next, in our last episode where we examined it was the impasse, that apparent feud between Barbara and Amazon,
Yeah.
you kept very fair and open mind about things, and with the greatest respect, you were also able to kind of question Barbara's ability to stay involved. And I think that was the way the conversation went as well. It wasn't just you. Like George said at the start, and Tom's mentioned about how Michael G. Wilson, there was a sense of him retiring, coming to an end. But Barbara leaving, is that, even though we talked about it in our very last episode,
Yeah.
has it caught you by surprise that she's gone or
I,
going?
I'm shocked. I'm absolutely stunned by it. I think I was made it my views clear on the episode that I thought that she would stay along and you'd need somebody with Amazon to share creative control. It's fair to say that it's clear that there has been a Barbara's creative juices haven't been flowing very much. She's not been sure where to go with the franchise since Daniel Craig's left, since James Bond's died. There's this whole aspect of where to go, and the problem is that you can't have time when a behemoth like Amazon has paid £8 billion for a product. And they have given quite a decent amount of time as well. So there was always going to be tension at some point that was going to snap. But I am stunned at A, how quickly it has come since that article's come out, and B, the way it has come out. I think that one thing that is incredibly telling to me is the statement that she makes, that there is no reference towards Amazon and there is no reference towards the future of Bond.
Yeah.
And I think
Unlike Michael G. Wilson's,
yeah,
he references both those things.
he does, but I think he's probably come from that perspective that because he had retirement in his mind already, he was probably thinking that's my view now. Whereas I don't think it was Barbara Broccoli's intention to necessarily step down. I think she was in that view of I need some more time to think about the way forward. And it's actually probably been the pressure and the tension that's come with working with Amazon that has probably forced her hand in a lot of ways. My view on it is that Barbara and Michael have done a fantastic job, regardless of anyone's preference. And I've not been a fan of the last few films, definitely. You can't argue with the critical and the commercial success of the films, and absolutely fair play for that. It comes down to a point. I am actually I'm hopeful as well. I'm wary. I understand possible dangers of a massive company like Amazon taking over something like James Bond, especially when you've got Disney and Star Wars an example. But what's the option? The option is either we go down an unknown route forward with Amazon, or we continue with no route forward at all, which is the situation as it is. And I'm willing to go down that first view. All this stuff about content, about, oh, we have to watch this, it's going to spoil this. You don't have to watch it. You don't have to watch it. What to me is the most important thing is, does this guarantee consistent James Bond films? And I think, yes, it probably does. And to me, that is why I'm hopeful.
Loving this series of hope that's going around, because in the last episode, when we started, I wasn't aware that I'd finished by pretty much concluding that I thought that Barbara and Michael had to walk away for it
Mm.
You did, yeah.
to prosper. And like I say, I didn't know, when we went into recording, I didn't know that was my view until I started saying it at the end, because I think it just had reached a point where, like you say, there was not just a tension between them, but I mean, being completely, I've got to be clear. I would love there to be a John Broccoli or a Jean Broccoli that's still in the family and they can pass it on to them and it's kept in the family, great. And they've created some succession plan where it stays in the family and it all carries on. But that doesn't exist. There is no such thing as that. Obviously, there's Greg Wilson, but I don't think even they have confidence in him that I don't, from what I can tell, have not put him forward that much. And I just to imagine that Barbara and Michael at this stage in their lives would have the creative juices and the energy to rethink Bond again and pump loads of marketing and have all that enthusiasm. I think, as much as we want it to continue, I think believing that they could do it would be a bit of a Hail Mary from Bond fans, to be honest, out of nowhere. It's not realistic, sadly. And of course, one of the things I love about this franchise is continuity and continuity behind the scenes and behind the camera. But for me, the truth is, I think they'd reached the end, sadly. And also, and I think we discussed it. I don't know how much of a vision they really had for the future anyway, whether they were how far along they were with it. Sadly, it's not been quite the ending that they should be getting these two in terms of its. It seems like it's the result of a fallout rather than them passing on the baton with pride and with excitement. So that's just like my view on it. Math. Obviously, Barbara is central to all this, all the quotes. She's always the first to answer on the red carpet and stuff like that. And before we look forwards to what the future might look like, please can we just include Michael G. Wilson in all this more and
Mm.
just reflect on his achievements and, of course, Barbara's achievements as a pair? Because, like I say, I do feel like their time had come to an end, sadly. But in no way do I want to criticize them. I mean, I don't agree with a lot of their decisions recently, I'll be honest, but I love them and I want
Mm.
them involved with Bond. I hope that they're involved with the next chapter. But Michael G. Wilson, Barbara Broccoli Math, let's just spend a bit of time reflecting on their achievements before looking anywhere else.
They've done remarkable things for the franchise, and I think it's extraordinary that they were able to carry it on from, their father, Cubby Broccoli. Like, that's amazing that they've been able to take that on. I mean, where else does this happen? People might be able to name stuff in films or TV where this happens, like a generational passing on of a much loved character and films and everything, but I can't bring it to mind. So I think it's amazing. I think Barbara has done a great job, and I really think that she'll be remembered for the Daniel Craig era. That was where she's really stepped up, and probably Michael G. Wilson has taken a step back. Those films have been, as has been said, really commercially successful. The casting of Daniel Craig as Bond was her choice, and it has been a real success. He's been a very popular Bond for a large generation of people. He is their James Bond. So she's done a fabulous job. We're all incredibly grateful for that. It is a bit of a shock, that she'll be stepping back in a lot of ways. Although I do, as has been said, it feels like with the Daniel Craig era coming to an end, for her then to start a new era of 10, 15 years, that is a lot of her energy that she would then need to find, because it does seem like that has come away. So thank you, Barbara, for everything you've done, and we're all so grateful. And I hope that she can be at least in some way involved going forward. In a backseat role in a Steven Spielberg with Jurassic World type role or something. Um, and Michael G. Wilson, yeah, I mean, I think we underrate him actually.
Yeah,
He's been part of some of my favourite era of James Bond, particularly the 80s. You know, him being a co-writer as well as a producer. You know, we often see directors being co-writers. In fact, it was the last film that was the only time a director has got a co-writing credit. But Michael G. Wilson did, as a writer for those 80s Bonds, did some fantastic work. And then as a producer has kept it going, and sort of probably brought along Barbara with her and then, you know, let her push forward and everything. So Michael G. Wilson, an absolute legend. And, you know, it's sad that we might not see his cameos in Bond anymore. I mean, I hope we do, but and of course at some point they have to stop. Um, but but yeah, that's a sadness. Yeah, so yeah, what those two individuals have done, carrying on from the dad, is incredible, and we're all so grateful. And whatever happens in the future, their legacy remains intact and very positive. If I can give some other thoughts as well, is that all right, Harry? Or
yeah. I mean, we are gonna bring the conversation more into the, looking forwards.
yeah,
But
well, just sort of looking on the past, then I just
yeah,
think in some ways there is sadness because it had to happen, but we're moving away from an era of all those people who had links to the past and to Bond from 1962, and you know all the it was one big family. They've always said that. If Amazon are able to replicate that, I really hope they do. That would be fantastic. But yeah, in some ways, it is sadness that this period, this era of the Broccolis is coming to an end. But you know, everything does have a kind of a life, a time, a cycle, and 63 years for one family is pretty good going.
absolutely. I mean, couldn't have said it better, really. All that they've done, and I suppose the question is the legacy that they'll leave, and how much of a fingerprint they'll have on the future films. Obviously, you talked about Michael G. Wilson making cameos, but beyond that, will there be roles for Barbara and for Michael? George, obviously, we don't want. It's not a. This is a James Bond podcast, but the comparisons with Star Wars are all there, and you are the man to come to on this in terms of you're a huge Star Wars fan, and you've kind of immersed yourself in the whole thing. Do you see the comparisons as legitimate? Do you think they're something that people are leaping to make a comparison, or do you think there is something to be observed and learnt from what happened with the Star Wars situation?
I think it's a combination of all of them. So I might get talking this. One quickly thing though, Matt mentioned about families, and this is going to come into this too. Tolkien's sons took over his I think he had a daughter as well. The Tolkien children took over and looked after Middle Earth. Now, I'm not a Tolkien, I haven't read them all, etc., etc. But my understanding is after the last child's died, that's been the last 10 years where we've now got Rings of Power, a Gollum game. Hunt for Gollum films are being made. Seems like the grandkids are the ones that are cashing in on his legacy. So my biggest concern with the Eon side of things has been, so I mentioned Greg Wilson. Is he the guy to carry James Bond? I'm not disrespecting him by saying no, but you look at how Barbara and Michael G. Wilson have been involved their whole life in the series, and that when the time came for those to lead it after Cubby passed away, they'd had that onset experience. They'd known the franchise. They knew what to do. And I feel like the Greg Wilson stuff, not disrespectfully saying he came in too late, but he sort of in PR appearances just cropped up around the time of No Time to Die. And would you want someone potentially who isn't really an outright producer being the creative future? It's a heavy, heavy burden, which leads into the Star Wars side of things, which is I don't know if you remember the day Star Wars got bought. I do. Arsenal were 4-0 down to Reading at half time and had a breakdown. The famous photo of George Lucas with all the Mickey Mouse group looking very upset. I'm in a really different stance to what people say. I don't mind Disney buying Star Wars. People forget George Lucas was hounded with the prequels. The media, fans, everyone, get rid, don't do it. If George Lucas had have announced Star Wars 7, people would have been kicking off it and pronouncing Star Wars 7. There's an amazing book I read many years ago called How Star Wars Conquered the Universe, and the last two or three chapters, it's basically a biography of the production, not the generic film stuff. And it spoke about the Disney deal. Bob Iger approached him out of the blue to buy it. He was shocked. He said no, but he'd revisit it. He then hired Harrison Ford. He got the trio back together, locked them in to do films. He then approached Kathleen Kennedy. People forget this too. One of the most successful film producers in the industry, worked with Lucas for decades, Spielberg for decades. Put her in charge as the president, then sold it all over to Disney with a plan in place to an extent. He wrote three treatments for his sequel trilogy, which they opted not to use. We still don't have much details about them, but the very few bits of story that came out are understandable as to why they weren't carried forward. But Disney took over. Naturally, with Disney being Disney, we'll want episode 7 out tomorrow. We want to direct it tomorrow. We're going to be making films that are overlapping. So episode 8 was filming before episode 7 came out, and episode 9 was meant to be filming around the time 8 came out, which all backfired for me personally. The two spin-off films. I don't know if you guys know that George Lucas had he wanted to do a live action Star Wars show back in the day, but it was too expensive. The first concept was Rogue One, and then it was Solo. And immediately Disney picked up all of these treatments, like, great, there's two spin-off films, let's go. So Disney were very much like took over, let's get the ball rolling, as you know, milk it. Then you've got Disney politics of Bob Iger steps down, Bob Chapek takes over. Disney Plus is going to be a new thing. Let's take all these films that have been designed for 2 hour films. Now they're TV shows for 6 hours at a time. And the streaming has backfired within the whole industry, not just on Disney. And now all the shows are slowly getting shelved and they're going back to doing films, which is why we're getting Mandalorian and not season 4. So there's lessons from Star Wars, absolutely, and it's really interesting. So jump in if anyone wants to, because I feel like it can go on a really deep tangent. But Star Wars isn't called Obi-Wan Kenobi. Star Wars isn't Anakin Skywalker. It's logistically, you could do anything you want in multiple millenniums. They've done comics, they've done games, they've done all of this. And that separates it for them to explore more. And if it doesn't work for some people, that's fine. Some of it doesn't work for me. Some of it really does work for me. And there's a great variety in there. Marvel is in the title of Marvel Cinematic Universe. Again, decades of historic characters from comics, blah, blah, blah. James Bond is James Bond. It's Ian Fleming's James Bond. It's not like MI5. Here's a series about like 10 different agents that come together. So my biggest concern has really been when Amazon talk of spin-offs, when Amazon, the article that came out 2 months ago, I don't know if I've been a minority on this, but the reaction online today, both within Bond community, has been quite negative. It's been really interesting hearing you guys thought, because again, a discussion's far more interesting than a 280 character tweet. People I know within film circles very negative on it because it's another studio acquiring another IP. When Amazon bought MGM, step one was we want to reboot Rocky and do a series about the moon landings or something outrageous, which clearly hasn't been made yet. I don't know if it's MGM, but apparently they're going to be rebooting The Wizard of Oz. So Amazon have very much gone in with that. Let's get these IPs out there and start doing stuff. On top of the article in December, for me, that's very worrying. But listening to you guys and the conversation with Barb, with Michael, what I think about with Greg, the lack of announcement for the future in this, if they'd have done a George Lucas and said, hey, I'm not saying use Kathleen Kennedy, but as the example is, I've sold Lucasfilm to Disney, my replacement TBC, but because there and then they put in a very famous film producer, you kind of think, okay, there's something there. They hired a great name in J.J. Abrams, very solid choice at the time, ironically not worked since 2019 on the film. Bond for me is like the pinnacle of British cinema. And I don't know if Harry Potter's been brought up on Radio 007 before, but I see Bond and Potter as like the two pinnacles of British cinema that if you were working in the industry, if it was shooting here, they're the ones you want to go on. And obviously Harry Potter, they tried their spin-offs. They didn't work thanks to J.K. Rowling, not the politics, just her writing screenplays was terrible. Then there was controversy with the multiple lead actors that were cast. And then it was, let's take this franchise, turn it into a different story within Harry Potter. but now we need to skip 25 years and make it work whilst all this other stuff's going on. So what's the outcome now is Warner Brothers have tried to buy Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling's refused. They want to do Harry Potter stuff, but they don't want her to do her own things because of how bad Fantastic Beasts have been. So they've gone and rebooted Harry Potter to be a HBO show, which I'm curious by as a Harry Potter fan. But I look at Bond as the other side of the British cinema where it's you've got 60 years of history, not a 10-year franchise. We grew up with. This is multiple generations. It's almost like a lifestyle that when the film comes out, you get all these posh companies like, we're the ones who are doing the suit for this scene. We're going to be doing the scarf on this scene. And it's not sell it to the highest bidder, but it's very much that. I don't want to use the word alpha male because it's not that, but it's a suave, it's an agent. He is, the ideal. I don't want to say man, that sounds so cringy, but he drives an Aston Martin, and I'm just sat here worrying like, we're going to get an American driving a Tesla or something like that. And there's lessons to be had. There's things to be worried about. There's a lot of things to be optimistic for. And I think if Amazon is smart, can they learn from their own mistakes with Rings of Power? A series I don't mind. I thought season one was average, season two was very good. But they hired two showrunners that never ran a TV show before. So there's no experience there. Then I'm looking at Greg Wilson thinking, okay, Amazon learning from Rings of Power, do they want not a household name as such, but do they need someone with a bit of experience? So I mentioned John Favreau earlier. You've got Favreau and Filoni now at Star Wars, 10 years later, really, who were running it when Kathleen Kennedy goes. Obviously, her role's going to get split up into these people who have been working there for a few years. And I don't want to say it's a criticism of Michael G. Wilson or Barbara Broccoli, but it kind of feels like there wasn't a third person for them to train up in the background on the side. Where, in an ideal world, not doing what ifs, but had Barbara stayed involved, I would have loved her to have been the Michael G. Wilson's The Craig films, where very important, very high up, but maybe there's someone else that had a little bit more power, that had more of that. This is what I want to do, this character. And I'm a bit nervous at the concept that there's no one there. And I'm looking at things like shooting at Pinewood, keeping it a British production with British crews. I don't want to say Americanize it, that's disrespectful. I don't mind if they shot a Bond film in America, but you don't want to lose the essence of what makes James Bond James Bond. And by not having Barbara or Michael G. Wilson is somewhat worrying for me. But then I'm also thinking about the statement today and the lack of info is what if there are clauses locked in where it is you will shoot at Pinewood, you will use British crews, you will use British cars or whatever they want to do. So it's so early days. The statement's so frustrating because it's such an important bit of news, but I'm just sat there saying that if there was a creative name, if there was someone attached to it, we'd know the direction where it's going to go, but we don't know that yet. And sorry to sort of turn Star Wars into that tangent, but
No,
it's very similar.
It's important to mention because at the moment with this statement, it's two humans, Barbara and Michael versus Amazon, which is just, you can't, those two entities are difficult to marry up. But like you say, it would be great if a name starts to come forward that Amazon are behind, if you know what I mean. A creative name. Like at one point, you might have thought Christopher Nolan might have been that person to take it into the future, and Amazon could have been behind that, for example. But that in the time that it's taken, we've probably missed that opportunity. But there is a chance that the next thing is that they unveil a name. But that, if we were to look at the Star Wars, the first one was J.J. Abrams, and that was films, wasn't it? John Favreau came about when it was, you know, over to like series. Do you, Steve, does the next step in your mind have to be a film?
I think if Amazon are wise, the first thing they would do is a film. They would get the ball rolling on a film. I still don't doubt they will want to do spin-offs, be them movies or TV shows. Fine. I'm open. We'll see what they come up with. I mean, it's a different world we live in now, and I have to accept that. But I think if they want to they know that people will be looking at this thinking, Amazon, people don't think of Amazon like they think of MGM or United Artists or Paramount or Warner Brothers, because we know that Amazon deliver our stuff to the door. They think of Amazon just as a big company. They don't think of them as art. Even with, you take Netflix, at least people think of them as a producer of content, movies, television. But as a streamer, Amazon has this thing where it's a massive company which is known for all sorts of things, and actually what from as far as making TV and films go, it's very hardly known at all. A lot of people have Amazon Prime, but a lot of the stuff on there isn't made by Amazon. So I think if they're going to get people on board, they need to tread a little bit carefully at the beginning. It's almost like baby steps. Baby steps being a $200 million movie, but that's what I think they need to do. And I think probably the first step is find a good producer who's going to pull good people together to make the movie. When we talk about a director, I'm not a fan of the idea of a big name director, because I'm a huge fan of Peter Hunt and John Glenn and people like that, who were just people who could tell a story, could direct action brilliantly, and didn't make the film about them. They made the film about James Bond. I don't really want a Sam Mendes, although he's brilliant. But what I would rather have is somebody who's a little bit more low key, but who just tells a good story, great with characters, that can do action, can do humor, can do drama, has the full thing, but without necessarily being a huge name, because I think the huge name can distract from actually being James Bond.
Even James Gunn stuff recently, he seems very keen to attach his name to things, and I think it's caused controversy because you either like him or you don't, and therefore people are picking sides and picking on him. I think you do, even if there is a name attached, I don't want someone who loves their own name and anything like that. I totally agree. So a big name could be a blessing or a curse in some ways. It'd have to be the right name, wouldn't it?
Because you did mention Chris Nolan, having said no big names. If it was him, I would be quite reassured, partly because he's a huge Timothy Dalton fan. I think if you're going to get on board with Dalton as Bond, you've probably got a good similar feeling to me. Now, I know films are going to be made differently. They're going to look different. The world's different. But that's a good starting point. You've got a story there which is very much about Bond. It's not too kitchen sink, but there could be an element of drama and great thriller, great stunts, great action. So I wouldn't mind him. If there was going to be a big name, he's the one I'd want.
Yeah, and like you say, perhaps one of the most appealing things about him is the fact that he's a super Bond fan. And I think that's what you want. However big the name, you want someone who can go to these Amazon meetings and say, no, this is what Bond is. Keep them on track. When the meetings are going a certain way, someone who can keep bringing it back to all those values that George has talked about.
Please forgive me for not being with you guys tonight to talk about this massive news. I'm away on family fishing as well. It's huge, isn't it? Absolutely huge. But this morning, before the news, I was at my most despairing point, or one of my most despairing points about James Bond ever. And now I'm at a much more positive point. I didn't think that was possible at all, but here we are. And Bond will continue and return. It might not be what everyone wants, it might not be to everyone's tastes, but it's going to happen. And after so many years of inactivity, where we seem to have been in this period of mourning, we can actually get excited and start looking to the future, and start thinking of what might be. And I'm really, really excited. I'm, of course, hugely grateful to Barbara and Michael and Woody for everything they've done for my enjoyment over the last 60 plus years. But if we look at it very bluntly, nothing has happened in a number of years. They seem to be at a creative impasse. For me, Bond is in a corner and is at the worst point ever in the franchise, literally because he's dead. And enough is enough, and it's time for a change and a change of direction. Something's going to happen. We're going to get another Bond movie. We're going to get a new James Bond. I think this is the best outcome for all parties. Let's not forget, Barbara and Michael will be there in the background. This is the best outcome. And I'm so excited and thrilled that we're all going to be going to the cinema to watch Bond again very soon. I am buzzing.
So we're talking about big names, but also Tom or anyone that wants to chip in, sorry. You've got this big name, but then there is a group of people who've been making Bond films, who've been involved in the creation of Bond films now for a few decades. I'm talking Purvis and, from anyone, from like Purvis and Wade down to Daniel Kleinman doing like. Do you think, Tom, it is a clean slate now? Do you think that this is a whole new era from the bottom up?
Yeah, I think it is. I know that might alarm people, but if you're going to create this new relationship with your audience and with your franchise, it will be silly just to sort of do exactly what everyone's been doing these last few years. It doesn't mean that they won't bring some of them back, of course. They may, you know, so going forward, I do think if you're a big company, you're like, right, what sells? What's the biggest thing that fans want in a Bond film? What will make the most money? The product placement's already there pretty much. So a lot of those relationships will, renegotiate contracts. I think that'll still go on. But in terms of, we've gone about the non-negotiables, I think they'll look to things like that immediately. I think they'll say there's got to be a gun barrel. There's got to be the name's Bond, James Bond in the first film we do. There's got to be a title sequence. There's got to be a song. So they may well say, right, Daniel, come up with this, but we're going to ask other people. We want as Simon Jordan would say, the best in class for everything.
You're talking about Kleinman, not Craig, just to confirm you.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think Daniel Craig is. I don't think there'll be any chance of him returning. Particularly, I mean, he was never going to return, but particularly as Barbara and Michael have left now, there's no chance of that. Yes, I do think creatively they do need a. There's a difference, of course, between a producer and a creative sort of person. A producer is someone who needs real experience of running these behemoths, as someone said. It can't just be someone, I think you said, George, for Rings of Power, who's not got the experience. It needs someone with a long, long experience of producing films, in my opinion. But I'm quite happy to have someone with a little bit of a backseat who has creative input that you might not have thought is that name, is that experienced. There's examples of this in other fields, aren't there? The Star Wars showrunners, people like Dave Filoni. No one would know who he was outside of Star Wars. He's obviously first and foremost a massive, massive Star Wars fan. He understands the lore of it. He understands the world that it's in, and he respects that franchise. So ideally, it needs someone like that. But let's be honest, you don't need an encyclopedia knowledge of Bond to run a Bond film. It isn't that complicated, honestly. And there's a lot of talk of it has to be somebody who really. It's not. I think it's dead simple. It's not like we need to read all the books and work out all that. That's not how you get Bond. You get Bond through. I don't know. It's like I suppose it's a feeling, isn't it? And yes, we all have different relationships, some different favorites, different actors we like. But I think if you appreciate what do audiences want, that's what they'll want, and I think that's how it's going to go. The casting will be the main thing. If I've said it many times before, but as soon as somebody's cast, that's all systems go. You think today was a massive day in terms of news, and everyone was like, "Oh gosh, clickbait and articles, interviews, everything." Imagine what it's going to be like when a new Bond actor is cast. It's just going to be crazy. That's when you get the excitement. No offense to Barbara and Michael, but no one will remember them when a new Bond's cast. It'll be all attention on the future, all attention on the present. Who is the new Bond? Because that will take a direction in itself, won't it? If you do have somebody like Henry Cavill, it's like, oh, I don't really know what direction that is. But if it's somebody, I don't know, a bit more gritty and who's done theatre and that kind of stuff, then you'd presume it would be going down a different scenario. So lots of people have said today, oh, this opens all those arguments, all the arguments over casting are wide open now because Barbara actually said it can be obviously a person of colour, it can be somebody who's gay, but it won't be a woman. Now, I don't think Amazon's reaction will be it can be all those things and it can be a woman. I think this makes it even more likely that it'll be an English white guy who's going to be Bond because they'll be thinking, what's the most I don't know. What thing do people think of when they think of James Bond in their head? And that's got to be the go-to. Q will
This
be back. M will be back. Moneypenny will be back. There'll be a villain, a proper villain. It's the secondary things are the ones where who knows in terms of what kind of style, what kind of genre, what kind of storyline we're going to get. But I think it'll have those non-negotiables that we all been harking for. And who knows? People say it might be a step back, but I think you've got to start with that. We saw it with GoldenEye, didn't we? Start with the absolute basics that everyone loves, and you really can't go wrong because you're going to make another one in a few years. And I do think they will do one. I think John might be right. It might be 2 years, and I think it will be. I think it'll be a film first because the only way they're going to kickstart a franchise is with a new Bond actor. Like I said, the, no one will realize that Amazon have bought it if you bring out just another Road to a Million. That's just a continuation of what's gone on before, or I don't know, a documentary or anything. It has to be a new Bond with a new actor, and then we're all systems go.
it's fascinating, and I hadn't quite realized this until you said it, that it felt like under Barbara and Michael, their desire was to almost break free of all the tropes and push Bond into a new world and appeal to new audiences in that kind of way and get acclaim from areas they've not had acclaim from before. Whereas now that the power's gone to Amazon, it could well be what you're saying, Tom, where they they are wanting to market James Bond, and to market James Bond, you need to tick all the boxes of what people want and what people expect. So the shift will probably see that exact thing that I think you're right that it will see that they and the next big thing probably is the casting of James Bond, not classy or whatever, but for me, I am really excited about the fact that someone as big as Amazon will be advertising the next James Bond. Like this is the biggest advertising opportunity, marketing opportunity known for bigger than Marvel or Star Wars because Amazon are everywhere. And like one thing I've mentioned perhaps a few times as a teacher of primary age children, James Bond is not a household name anymore, and that's always made me sad. Whereas I think you're now going to get a chance of him appearing on billboards to advertise things. He's going to be on adverts, and not in necessarily a bad way, but I think he is going to be out there. Amazon are going to put him out there more than we've seen recently, and that's something that I get really excited about. And I know there'll be some people who think that that's cheap, but that's the thing that I'm really excited about, especially going back to what you said, Tom, about the security of the franchise. It's financially and having the backing over the last 30 years, it's been quite tricky to keep it, with all these problems that they've had. So it feels like it's in a very strong place having Amazon in its corner. John, we're talking about the casting of Bond being next.
Hmm.
What do you think is needed next, and what do you think's next? Do you think it's the casting of Bond that will hit us? What do you reckon?
Yes, I do. I think they want to come out with a statement. I think they'll want to nail the colours to the mast and say this is it. That some of the more well-known names who have been rumored before are probably more likely now than previously because I think that Amazon will probably not go for a lesser known kind of actor who they can mold. They will probably want to go for a star of sorts who can carry that franchise. So I do think the likes of Aaron Taylor Johnson, the likes of Henry Cavill are probably more likely now than they were previously. That excites me actually. Hearing Tom say a lot of the stuff that he says actually it reassured me because I do realize that saying this is unknown territory and that this is end of an era and the likelihood that a lot of people's jobs who have been involved before they will probably not be involved in the same way. It does leave open to you do not know what you are getting. You don't have a clue what it is. And we could be sat here in 5 years' time thinking, what have they done? But the other reality is that we didn't know what we were getting from Eon as well, you know. So it's a roll of the dice. But I do think what you are going to get is a massive blockbuster film with a big star name. That's
Yeah,
what I get.
I agree. I think all of a sudden those big names now they are the type of names and faces that Amazon might favor. And we've sort of said about it in the past, and Tom's particularly said it, that Barbara and Michael, and going further back, they always got the casting of Bond correct, actually. Whatever people might have their favourites, whatever, for the moment in time, they always got it right. It does feel like the approach might well be different now, though. Like you say, we're not going for an unknown, but Bond is going to be packaged and backed in a different way now. Math timescales, do you think we are going to see something sooner than we might have done had things carried on with Barbara and Michael involved? Do you think it's going to accelerate things?
Yeah, I do. I said on the last one, it could be we could be looking 2028 at the absolute earliest, which it still might be, but I was thinking it might be not this decade that we see something. If it had been Barbara and Michael, yeah, this casting, they'd be thinking again, right, we've got to do something a bit different. We've got to go down the unknown route. We've got to do this, that, and the other. And I just don't think that's where cinema and that works in that way anymore. The idea of the star of your franchise not really liking it and not promoting it and having to be begged back, I think those days are over. I don't think that's what well, that's not what fans want. That's not what big studios want when they're trying to sell their products, their franchise, their brand, their everything. What they'll first have to decide is what are they doing. And I agree. I think it will be a film rather than a series or anything like that. I want a few comments I wanted to make about a series as well, but I'll come on to that in a sec. Um, so that let's say they're making a film. I think the next thing will be because I think this is now more of a possibility, although I don't think they will. Are we going to look at the books again? Are we going to remake any of the books? Because I think that's now more of a possibility with
Mm.
Amazon getting the rights. I'm not sure. Then, but I had that same thought, Tom, that I think this now makes it like we're going to get more of a traditional Bond rather than how can we make this all different? How can we make this as Bond as possible and sell it for the 21st century and everything? I also think so again, I was thinking standalone adventures. That's been mentioned a lot. Oh, we need to go back to standalone adventures. I can't see that happening. I think they'll want to have some sort of continuity across them. Maybe not direct sequels and everything, but certainly characters carrying over. Possibly some storylines possibly carrying over, love interests, etc. But yeah, when I was thinking about that, I was thinking, I just think Barbara and Michael must have been, particularly Barbara, like, right, what do we do now? Do we go back to standalone or do I have to do this all again? Whereas we've now got fresh sets of eyes to bring this, hopefully not dragging, kicking,
Kicking
screaming, dragging,
the
kicking and
heels.
screaming into.
Dragged across
But
country.
yeah, but I also think I was trying to think of comparisons, and obviously the Star Wars one keeps coming up. People saying, "Please, please, let's not do that." But these are the same people, a lot of the same people who I thought quite enjoyed some of these Star Wars shows. I don't think there will be anywhere near the same amount as has been discussed. I think I've been thinking for the last few weeks, what about a nice Felix Leiter spin-off? That wouldn't be so bad, would it? Like 6 episodes set in America, set completely differently, or set around the world, but different set of characters. That really wouldn't be so bad, would it? And yeah, and so I was thinking, right, well, what's the similarity in that regard? Well, the Batman has just
Mm.
had the Penguin, and I don't see that they're going to absolutely oversaturate that. I know it's very different with comic books and all this, that, and the other, but a limited series that's just gone on. They might do another limited series or whatever, but that's Batman where they've got loads of these different iconic characters and everything. But it is also more limited than Bond in some ways in that it really has to be set in Gotham. But anyway, that's just these are just some of the thoughts I've kind of had. I'm optimistic about the near future.
Yeah.
I'm perhaps a little more concerned, wary of where it could go 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years hence. That's just just
Go on, in
based
terms
on
of what kind of things would.
how they will react to trends
Yeah.
and not be as bothered about protecting Bond as Barbara and Michael, which they have done sometimes, possibly with the best intentions, but maybe not quite getting it right. Who's going to possibly protect it from the next but one showrunner? Not showrunner, you know what I mean?
Just on that point, Math, there's a guy in one of our WhatsApp groups called Chris Swolmius Dato, and he made an incredibly valid point in what he said that the rights to the Ian Fleming books actually run out in 10 years' time.
Mm,
So in 10 years' time, it will be fair game for people to make James Bond stories full stop.
yeah.
So I wonder if that actually is one of the main reasons that's pushed this all down in some ways, because it will be on the back of Amazon's mind that we've paid a lot of money for something, and in 10 years' time, whilst they may not be able to have the official nature, we need to set our stamp in that time, and the waiting for Barbara and all the rest of it. Come on, there is actually a time frame going on here. But I suppose in some ways that is the saving grace. Is if in 10 years' time we are looking back and we are thinking, oh my word, what has happened? Could be some amazing independent who
Yeah.
could make something. It's a weird thing to say, but it's not like we are stuck forever down one route. Now, that could be a problem as well, but I just think there are options.
And I always think of it like this as well. That we're obviously living in the now. It's the only place we can live. And most of us here were particularly keen on the Daniel Craig films, and certainly not most of them. And we feel like, oh, it's gone in a bad direction. But imagine there were podcasts around in the 1970s. You'd have had groups of people just like us who'd grown up with just Sean Connery, and they were now got Roger Moore. And they'd be like, I don't like the direction these films have gone. This guy's too light. It's too much humor. He's wearing flares. Wherever you're at, you kind of like you're in the now, and obviously we've got our favourite eras, and in 20 years' time, Daniel Craig will just be another part of this era that came along, and we'll be deep down the road of Amazon and whatever they do. So even if what they do next isn't our favourite thing, I think what all this has shown is just how important and strong the franchise is, that the biggest company in the world has bought into it, and it's going to plow loads of money into it. It's going to make stuff. Hopefully we'll love it, but if we don't, it's just another step on the road, and then further down the road, somebody will do something different. I think what this shows us is Bond is not going away ever, and I think that for me is one of the most positive things.
Yeah.
And obviously, I'm really hopeful that we're going to love what they do. Probably won't love everything they do, but if I love some of it, wow, that's brilliant.
Could I just ask George a question, perhaps?
Yeah.
On the whole business of saturation and worlds being built, other than Disney with Marvel and Star Wars, and I know you're talking about this before pretty much, but what have Amazon ever had multiple, a universe or whatever that they've got multiple shows on? I know you mentioned about Rings of Power and that, and then Netflix don't really do that. Has there ever been any equivalent of this other than Disney?
I was gonna I'm glad you brought up them as well, actually, 'cause you made some really good points earlier. What I was thinking with Amazon is you've got Rings of Power. Now, their original series, the one they've made from scratch, is The Boys. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. It's the superhero satire one. Probably one of my favorite shows at the moment, and it's the best kind of satire. It mocks both left side, right side, middle, whatever. It does all of it. It's unbiased in how it does it. And they do spin-offs to that now. Although they're shooting their final season now. They've done maybe 5, 6 seasons. Netflix will make anything. All they care about is the word content. And this is what I was kind of thinking of Amazon. As you guys were talking more and more about what we'd like to see. Amazon don't have a heavyweight in terms of an IP. Because the Rings of Power, detrimentally online looked at by certain, I personally say, loud echo chambers. It's done very successful view-wise for them. It's their flagship show, you could say. And at the end of the day, that dream came from Bezos saying, I want Lord of the Rings in my company. And then it happened. And that's the power we're dealing with stuff like that. And I was kind of thinking of Apple where Apple in the last few years have built up an incredible library for film and TV, but they're abysmal at marketing it. And I was just sort of sitting there thinking that Amazon haven't really had that film dynamic. I mean, Apple are going to get the F1 film in June, which looks like it's going to be massive, the Brad Pitt one. Netflix, of course, is its own thing. They've even got Knives Out, which they have to embarrassingly not release the numbers for because it was so successful in cinemas, it defeated Netflix's own purpose. And kind of where I'm going with this with Bond is that if Amazon really were to stretch out Bond, especially with you guys talking about the rights, which I think is it Winnie the Pooh where we keep getting these awful like horror things. Have you seen them all online?
Yeah.
Like the rights expire and it's like here's a twisted horror film. If someone pointed a gun to my head and I was running Amazon and they're like, go make a James Bond show, I'd certainly look at it in this perspective. If you're trying to retain the iconography of Bond as a franchise, uh, everyone always talks about they'd love to see the books adapted now, set contextually, well, set in the 50s or how they were meant to be. For me personally, I love the films and I love the films are the here and now. And you can look at Bond as a history book. You go to a film in the 60s, it's the Cold War. You look at it in the 10s, it's like post 9/11. Go to it in the 90s, it's like all the USSR dissolved. For me, I'd love them to keep doing films set present. But if they ever did want to do a series, why not start doing the books as a show every other year? Because then you'd have two James Bonds being adapted at the same time, both completely different with one another, with different audiences, different story settings, and it would cover that whole, I don't want to say we're milking it vibe, but we don't want four or five shows at the same time, like where stuff like Disney's failed. Another studio, sorry, you mentioned DC. The DCU, one of the biggest collapses in the industry, where so reactionary to Marvel. You know, Christopher Nolan made a great trilogy. They begged him to stay. He did the story on Man of Steel. He helped recruit Zack Snyder, and then Warner Brothers failed by giving Zack Snyder the keys to the kingdom. And then immediately he cast a new Batman, and it backfired, and you got all the politics there. That studio sits in limbo. They bring in James Gunn, who I'm glad you brought up earlier as well, Harry, because it's some really good points. He is the creative visionary for them moving forward. Now, his first film's not out yet, but he knows the comics, and they've hired the producer type to be that guy's going to do the business side of the company. You'll do the production side, and I'm interested to see what they do with him because I don't think he's a household name. I think Warner Brothers are so over reliant on saying director of Guardians to try and sell Superman, and I'm just sort of sat there with Bond saying if not John Favreau as a Star Wars example, Favreau's done film and TV for decades. Filoni's the Star Wars guy. So those two have got a great working relationship. And again, because we don't know who fits that umbrella with Eon, is maybe two people come forward to do the work of one person historically. And it's an interesting time for these franchises because every studio under the sun wants to mine something. A great recent one, Cobra Kai, the Karate Kid films that got new life elsewhere and now we're getting films again. So it's a very sort of delicate subject, but where I'm also leaning towards is because Amazon don't have a face of their film division, it's going to be Bond now. So for me, what they have to do, and I'll jump back to Force Awakens as a one-off example. Force Awakens was incredibly safe. Some would argue too safe, but at the time, it's the third highest grossing film in history. It grossed what, over $2 billion? They
Yeah.
got the original trio back. They got unbelievable young actors in. Some of them are having incredible careers now. They went for practicality, shooting on locations, whilst also doing amazing pioneering CGI. They absolutely nailed that first one because Disney knew it's make or break on that first film. If you get the first one wrong, you're screwed. Now, I love episode 8 and I hate episode 9. That's my history with them three. But episode 8 was the one where they went for it creatively to do something and it didn't work. It was split 50-50 for most. So again, I'm in the side that loved that. Then episode 9 was there. We're going to listen to a loud echo chamber, and then episode 9 is what episode 9 is. And you look back at that sequel trilogy now, and it's sort of what a missed opportunity. And I never thought I'd ever say that about Star Wars. And I don't want Bond to go that way to the point that, sorry to talk Star Wars again, but Kathleen Kennedy cites James Bond as the example now. She said Star Wars films now need to be event films like they were, like James Bond is. And the fact James Bond has Star Wars saying that about them, the fact that as much as I love the Batman, I'm so glad you brought the Penguin. Who'd have thought we needed another Batman multiverse? Yeah, we've just had Golden Globe winning Penguin series, which is as good as any gangster drama you're going to see. So there's certainly room for Amazon to do something. And where you could say the DC side with Matt Reeves' Batman is James Gunn said to Matt Reeves, "You do your own Batman, you do your own thing. I won't touch your Batman stuff. Do whatever you want to do." And I just hope that Amazon do this with Bond. Like you said, we want the gun barrel, we want the song, we want the intro. You look at Goldeneye, and I say this about Casino Royale actually, is that when people look at the Craig era, you forget how action heavy Casino Royale is. You know, you got the opening scene, um, you got the parkour stuff. There are so many amazing action segments that watching that for the first time, I was, God, 10. And I've seen Die Another Day and I love my Brosnan and stuff, but Casino Royale was like, wow, I was hooked from a young age. And in line with that, I knew of Bond because I had the Brosnan films, but I also had games, I had magazines. There was actively stuff going on that wasn't films. I don't mean to sway the conversation, but I'm not saying Amazon go make games, but I'd like to see, and this is where it gets really murky saying this, I'd like to see the IP as an overall be more accessible. That goes in hand with a store that does outrageous, disgraceful £200 teddy bears or whatever nonsense they do every other week. Release some cars for us to get like when we were kids. I know the video games industry is a bit different now compared to 20 years ago, but if you've got something going on with games, you can bring in audiences, affordable merchandise for younger people. I get you can't advertise everything for like an under 10, but you can do merchandise that can
What
be
about a
sustained.
James Bond VR game? I just did VR
Yeah,
last weekend at a place in Birmingham, and it was unbelievable. It's
Mm.
how you are in the world
Die
now.
Another Day style.
yeah.
Bond one could be incredible. Sorry, George, carry on.
No, of course. Like even things like Lego, there was the cancelled Lego trailer, and I
Yeah.
understood that Lego was like, it's not within our own IP's Lego to be doing the gun type thing, but we've now had a Lego James Bond set, a little 20 quid one. I've had a £200 one a couple of years ago, the DB5. Why not do a couple of Lego sets? There's so much rich history to be explored, not exploited,
Yeah.
and there's a fine line with those. Again, Star Wars has gone the way where I like a lot of it, I don't like all of it. It's so polarizing. DC's gone the way of this is kind of embarrassing. Lord of the Rings is my great unknown that do I really care about a Gollum film directed by Andy Serkis? I love Andy Serkis, but do we need a Gollum film? We really don't. I think Bond stands above all of those. It's quite prestigious. It's not me being a snob. I just think historically within the industry, how big the Marvel films were 5, 10 years ago. The Marvel films aren't those big anymore. They've done too many TV shows. But in the 60s, James Bond was Marvel. You start looking at the numbers and you get into the boring analysis of finances. Those James Bond films, adjusted for inflation, are bigger than Marvel ever was. And the Daniel Craig films, their credit really lifted that commercial side, as I mentioned earlier. They did the accolade side of the Oscars. And I might get shot for saying this, but I still don't mind the ending of No Time to Die on the premise that it's a book for Daniel Craig's era, and now we're moving past that era. Amazon need to go all out for what is next. It doesn't matter what is next. It's got to be a GoldenEye Casino Royale. You've got to get your actor, build the film around them, and maybe a director and a visionary to do it. Personally, some really good conversations about what you said as well. That you think some of the actors who were linked before. Right now, I would have Henry Cavill as the favourite, and I've not had him as the favourite for 3, 4 years because they've spoke about a younger Bond. They want someone to carry it for 10 years to build around. I could see Amazon saying tonight, like, for the immediate future, let's get Cavill. He's a big name. He can probably do 3 films, maybe 4 films. They've just signed him on to do Warhammer, so he's already in with Amazon Studios. He's got a buy-in, and in terms of that Star Wars comparison, playing it safe to an extent, Henry Cavill's the guy that if you put his face as James Bond, thankfully, you've got all the stuff with The Rock with all the politics where he went back as Superman for a credit scene and got screwed over, not his fault. I thought that killed Cavill's Bond chances. I think right now, if I was betting, I'd be putting money on Cavill. I think if you were Amazon, if you were the studio, you're looking for those big names instantly who would take it. I'm not talking to Tom Hardy, who I just don't think would ever be right as a Bond, but Henry Cavill is that face definition of Bond. He's done the spot. He's done Man from Uncle. He's done Mission Impossible. He's done adverts with Aston Martins in the background. He's the perfect Bond for I think what it needs to be right now. And because if Amazon get this film wrong, without playing devil's advocate, I'm not saying the franchise dies, but your first film, if it without the original Eon at your side to an extent, that doesn't work out for you, you're in a world of trouble moving forward. And that then gets down to other people involved. So sorry to sort of dilute it into a sort of an overall. It's just you guys are talking about some
Oh
really
no,
good stuff. But
it's great. All you're saying is absolutely brilliant, George. Every sentence, pretty much. There's a lot to say. Getting like thinking of Cavill just latterly in the conversation, getting him, it kind of makes me think of, and it's a comparison mainly just for UK and US people, I suppose. But like, there's some kind of link between the comeback of gladiators on TV in terms of people want that. They want, however, strange it looks, and it's not dark and gritty. It's a bit of escapism. People want heroic looking people, and they will sell. So, sorry, just when you're mentioning him, I thought, do you know what? My children are obsessed with gladiators, and that is all about harking back to those feelings of way back when. And the other thing, like when you're talking about like the history as well of Bond and everything, the other side of all this is that I'm hoping it reinvigorate the old films. All of a sudden, you are going to get a lot greater access to the films, and they when you're getting Bond 26 advertised, I would hope that Amazon Prime has a whole James Bond section that
yeah,
celebrates all these amazing films through the decades. And Matt's mentioned in a previous episode where that there might be documentaries about the certain. It doesn't always have to be a spin-off where it's an actual work of fiction, but like documentaries about the past. As a streaming platform now, there is so much potential to celebrate the first 25 films as well. And I hope that Amazon, as well as looking forwards, they really sell the first 25 as well, because that's something to be excited about. And obviously, we love them being on ITV, and Steve, we love ITV and everything. But for Amazon to be, around the world, the go-to place, the one-stop shop for all things James Bond, a bit like how when you look at Disney Plus, you've got a Marvel section, a Star Wars section. For there to be a 007 section every time you go on Amazon Prime, he's always there, which is just brilliant. And like you guys all talked about being hopeful. I'm genuinely, maybe I'm being a bit naive, but I'm really excited about all the opportunities that there are, that are huge. And again, talking about Rings of Power, I've not seen it, so I can't possibly comment, but they didn't go cheap and tacky with Rings of Power, did they? They went rich and long, kind of, if you know what I mean. Like, do you know what I mean? They didn't.
Mm.
I know it wasn't a hit necessarily the first series, and there's a few question marks, but they didn't. It wasn't to do with it being tacky and art by committee or anything like that. Am I right? It's they tried to put a classy kind of spin on it
it
that's slow burning.
it looks phenomenal. Now I've not read, um, God, the compendium, whatever it's based off. So that's going to piss off loads of Tolkien fans. But the thing with Rings of Power is it's trying to do like a story I think that spans thousands of years in 40 episodes, which is a bit illogical. To put it as an understatement. I can't really get into politics because it's not my place to, but it was very much like, oh, there's a black dwarf, and then people are like, very much the typical online folk, which happens in every IP now. It doesn't matter what race somebody is on screen, someone somewhere's kicking off, which is outrageous. And I'm glad that Amazon essentially just didn't comment on it because they're sat there saying, well, small portion of the internet saying this, but guess what? We've got 600 million minutes viewed or something like that, that they're sat there saying we've got the data that makes it work. We're doing more seasons. We stand by our actors and our creative team. There are some issues with the show, but season two was great. It's got some really well choreographed action sequences, but because it doesn't adapt every sentence and every single page the exact way it was written, which based off when I've read Tolkien, it's a very unique way of writing, is a polite way of saying how I read The Hobbit. It leaves a lot to the imagination. And I think sometimes people's imaginations, especially in worlds like that, can't be resolved. They pulled Lord of the Rings out of New Zealand after season one because of all the aggro filming during COVID. They put it back here in the UK. People kicked off about that, but Middle Earth was written here in the UK. It was an integral part. I think it's Oxford that Tolkien wrote all the books in. So you can't please everyone with everything. And Rings of Power is a tricky one because again, if they just want a little bit more experience, but I think you're doomed to Lord of the Rings. You've got three of the best ones ever made of films in unbelievable circumstances that won't ever happen again. So many loopholes were done for that to even be a thing. Peter Jackson if they were being made today, it wouldn't have been an unknown director like Peter Jackson in Lord of the Rings. They would have gone for like a very typical studio type guy. So it's an interesting dynamic, and I think Bond is in its own sort of position where I'm not sitting here saying Bond's bigger than Middle Earth, but we know as James Bond fans that the James Bond films have been their own entity for 60 plus years. You know, you don't have to have read the James Bond books to have sat down and watched and enjoyed those films. You vice versa, you can do whatever works for yourself. And if there's options where Amazon want to explore more of Fleming's work, they absolutely should. And if they don't want to, then we know historically they don't need to. So it leaves a lot open. Sorry, I feel like I've just sort of waffled on a side tangent, but
It's
yeah,
all relevant because Bond is now entering this new era of filmmaking and streaming, so it's all relevant. John, sorry, yeah, I was
Yeah,
you
sorry.
go for it.
I'm probably going to get lynched by some people online for saying this kind of thing, but what a much better position it is to actually be wondering about what our future film are now going to be like, rather than if there's going to be a future film anytime soon. What a much better position it is that people are now worrying about we're going to have too much content of James Bond, rather than when is the content going to come from James Bond? I just think like some people can never be happy. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that,
Well,
and I could regret saying this, but I'd rather cast me net and see what happens rather than just get so prissy about,
Hmm.
about.
I totally agree. That's how I
And,
feel.
and
And
actually, when you think about it, on that very point, we can get hung up on Barbara and Michael stepping aside, and yeah, that's a shame. But Michael's 83,
yes,
and Barbara's not old as you said, but she is 64. And probably after giving most of her life to the franchise, she's quite happy to do something else. But my point being, they aren't going to be around forever anyway.
no,
Hmm.
So at some point, the films are not going to be produced by Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, even if they wanted to carry on for 100 years. That's not going to happen.
yeah,
So we've just reached a place that was inevitable anyway.
I agree. Even if they'd done Bond 26, could they commit to 27, 28, and 29? Who knows?
Yeah.
But like John, going back to what you've said there as well, and I agree. I think it's frustrating when fans aren't, take an immediately negative view. But we've got to try and understand that, and there are valid reasons for some of that. What do you think Amazon needs to do to reassure those? Do you think that
Yeah,
it's a recurring part of our conversation that these production companies, and including Eon,
yeah,
don't need to tailor the
no,
Bond films to the fans because the fans will always be there. But on this occasion,
yeah.
do you think there is something that Amazon will need to do that could convince the naysayers that actually, they're the ones who cherish the series and want to do good with it? I mean, this is
I
not
think
you go for it, John, but it's open to anyone.
the first thing I would say is the best step they could make is announce that they will release films on cinema. I think
Yeah.
that that would reassure so many people, because so many people just have it in their head, oh, it's all going to be streamed, blah, blah, blah. Now, if we can just say we're going to have cinema releases of James Bond films, I think that allays so many people's fears.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
agreed.
then you've got a platform after that that you can start adding additional content. But if people know that, all right, we might get X, Y, and Z on streaming services, but we're going to have a cinematic Bond, I think people.
Do you think they'll be pleased? Did you just say then that you think they'll be pleased even if there are bonus things, extra things on streaming? Do you think they'll still be happy with that,
I think they'd be happier. I think
knowing
that
that there are films?
the thing is that my issue with the whole thing about additional content is that just don't watch it then. You know what I mean? Like, as if you don't watch it, if you keep Bond the main thing, if you keep a cinematic Bond as your jewel in the crown, everything else is just your condiments. You know?
The thing is, though, you'll get some kind of division and snobbishness. I imagine there'll be some. I don't know if how many Bond fans would be happy to. Yeah, just watch the films, and there are people out there who know more about the streaming. I don't know. I reckon there'll be some fans like there are in all these circles of whatever franchise it is. It's kind of an all or nothing approach. They turn the back, the stubborn, and they won't give any of it a try. As much as I agree that you could say just don't watch the streamable stuff.
I don't know. I mean,
I don't know.
I've given up on all the Star Wars series on Disney. I still go and see every Star Wars film that comes to the cinema because I think Star Wars for me works as a film, and I like
Yeah,
the impact of being at cinema. The series, I don't think they've actually been terrible. I've just kind of got bored with them, so I've just chosen not to watch them.
that's it. So there you have it. So it is possible, people. It is possible that you don't have to watch the streamable stuff, and you can still enjoy
I think
cinematic releases.
I think the difference would be perhaps with Marvel. Again, George Matt will know this more than me. A lot of them now are all very linked to the films that then come out. So it's like, well, you have to have watched this
Yes,
in
yeah.
order to. I can't see that. I can't really see that with Bond. I mean, unless someone else disagrees with that, but unless there was like a Spectre series that
Well, your Felix series could link, and I don't
It's,
know how much the Penguin links to the Batman, and
I,
but
I was going to say like the Penguin's a great one because you can watch the Batman and then watch the Penguin. It's like great. And when
Mm.
the Batman Part Two inevitably films, you're going to be able to watch that without watching the Penguin, and you're not going to
Yeah,
miss anything. Vice
that's what you
versa,
yeah.
and
need. That's what
you
you
can
need.
you
I think
can
going
even
back
watch the Penguin without watching the Batman, which is
to
even ballsier, which works.
Yeah.
going back to George's initial point is that this is not a Marvel universe, it's a James Bond thing, and that's the saving grace, I think, because you can have spin-offs about characters in that universe, but it doesn't necessarily have to affect the character of James Bond. Whereas it's like it's not an Iron Man universe or a Captain America universe, it's the whole of the Avengers and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think that hopefully means that you can separate the two.
But there is only so much. Like people worried about the Money Penny Diaries or a Q series. Like, yeah, but they're not just. They've got to put stuff that they think people will like. I mean, do they think people will want to watch a lot of those things? I
This
don't
is
know.
where
I just think I can understand there being a bit of a shock and an extreme reaction in some regards, but I just think we've said it before. I think what's the alternative? Because I think the alternative, people have been saying I get people asking me because they know I'm a Bond fan, like, oh, have they cast a new Bond yet? I was like, do you realize how far away they are? Like, there's not going to be a new film
Before today, do you mean? Before
yeah,
today?
before today. It's not going to be a new film for years, decade maybe. We're so far away. Now we're not. We're somewhere. There's gonna have to be something really soon. And like I say, I understand some shock and sadness with Barbara and Michael leaving, but Steve said it had to happen at some point. This, with No Time to Die coming to an end and the Daniel Craig era, it has to be now. It's taken a bit too long, really. Yeah, I think John said, Amazon, they got the rights, 3 years ago, and that they've already given quite a lot of time. 3 years, no suggestion of a new film. So now is a new, we're in a new phase, a new era of James Bond. It's going to be different, but it's something. It's going to happen.
Tom, do you think Amazon will have been watching how this news is received, and do you think it could inform their next movement at all?
I think yes to the first question, not necessarily to the second. Yes, because Jeff Bezos did his a post on X, didn't he? Which I welcome. It's getting Bond. It's the conversation, getting it out there. Who cares if people are offended and they've done mock-ups of him as Blofeld, of course, and all that. I mean, that's the snobbishness that will come with big business versus two poor billionaires like Michael and Bob. No, I'm only joking. Uh, no, but at least it's getting the conversation going. I don't think he's ever going to listen to, oh, this bot account tweeted that this guy should be Bond. Of course not. They'll be working behind the scenes on that. I think the announcement today, and you can go back to the wording of it. It reveals that uh, nothing's been done. Nothing's been decided since 2019 when they wrapped filming. It means that they didn't have a plan, as far as I'm aware. I know they might say, yes, we had this and it was rejected by Amazon, but I don't believe that. I think to be fair, they wanted a gap to sort of take in the Bond's death and that era, and then wait and see what audience reactions would be to judge it. But now that Amazon are in control, there is actually less pressure, I think, creatively. That people will say that's bad because they're only interested, some fans are, I'm only interested in new Bond if it's got a new direction. And then if you say I want it to go back to the Brosnan type era where it was a bit more action, a bit more fun, people get snobbishness about that and say we've done that already. We need to another. So there's actually a real pressure on Michael and Barbara to do something. How you can't get any less epic. You can't. It's
Yeah.
gone so soap opera that it'll have to come back down to earth. But before it was just go from Moonraker to Few Eyes Only, go from Die Another Day to Casino Royale. Okay, there's a different shift in terms of the lineage and all that, but there's less pressure now. And to pick up on some other points, when you mentioned George about the whole Penguin, the Batman going on at the same time, Matt said it as well. There's still only one Batman in that universe. It's just that they don't. There's no. I don't think there's any way they're going to suddenly cast two James Bonds at the same. Absolutely no chance. So yes, I know people will want a leather brown looking 50s remake of Moonraker the novel and all that. I'd be absolutely amazed if that's the first thing they do. I think it would be far too risky. They need to get one James Bond who can rule all the rings, rule the whole thing for a good few years. And I think even in this conversation, I've changed my mind about 5 times about who that will be. Because sometimes you think it's very vogue, isn't it, to get an unknown in a big franchise. They always get an unknown director for Marvel or an inexperienced director for one of the younger characters in them. Always someone who's fairly unknown. Star Wars, all the young cast, no one knew who they were. But that's because they've got way more characters and they've got the legacy characters to, it doesn't matter who's those parts because, oh, look, there's Harrison Ford, there's Carrie Fisher, there's Mark Hamill, it doesn't matter. But with this, all we care about in the casting really is Bond. Yes, you can have a famous actor who is the main villain, but I think it would be a bit risky if they say had someone as famous as I don't know, if they had like the biggest hot talent right now who's the villain and an unknown as Bond, then I think that'd be a bit risky because this has to be someone who's going to helm the franchise
Yeah.
for a few years. And the other point that you mentioned about the rights issue, if there's only 10 years left, they need to get going. They need to get ahead of the pack. Because, yes, even in 10 years, these people won't be able to do what they can do now because of those protected characteristics that Never Say Never Again couldn't do, the gun barrel and the title sequence and things like that. So I think they'll always have the edge, but why not go way ahead? Let's get, a 10-point lead at the top of the Premier League. Let's do that. Never mind games in hand. Get the points on the board, get the films in. We could have three or four films maybe before those rights come in, and then you're good to go again on another new actor perhaps. So I'm hopeful that means that there's more chance of Henry Cavill or whoever getting the Bond. They are very different these franchises. You can have, I think you could have a Felix series alongside it, but it would have to be the same actor, like Colin Farrell's in the Batman.
Mm.
It would have to be the same actor
Yeah.
the Bond. I think two timelines at once now, no chance. I don't think that's going to happen. Yes, you can do the tie-ins with the toys, the books, the merchandise, things like that, the VR. There's loads of new ideas that you can have. I think I know I'm sort of picking up all these things as I
No,
remember.
that's great.
What John said is, "Oh, we want to know that it's a cinema thing," and us as fans, that's what we want. Yes, but the world has changed. I'd be slightly more worried about that because everyone says they loves films now, but everyone is far lazier. Far fewer people I know can be bothered going to the cinema now. People would rather watch a rubbish film on Netflix that they know is going to be rubbish than drive 5 minutes to their multiplex to see, the latest blockbuster. And they can just wait for it to come on streaming. Now, Marvel, if they could do it like Marvel, where yes, it's a cinema event, and
Yeah.
you're so interested in it that I need to see it first at the cinema. I think they've got that with Bond. I think they've got that. They don't
Yeah.
need to be like, oh, well, if it doesn't do that well, quick whack it out in streaming. They don't need to do that. It will come out in streaming earlier than it would have done on TV, obviously. It might only be 6 months a year. And it was, I think No Time to Die came out fairly, it wasn't that long, was it, after George? Okay, you'll be able,
Um, so this was something I was going to say is that the big thing with Amazon, you all mentioned about getting back to the cinema. You need to tell the audience, no, you can't wait 4 weeks. It's on a streaming service. You have to get off your ass and go
yeah,
to the
yeah,
cinema. And I think Top Gun Maverick's like the best. No Time to Die performed amazing. And these days you get these humongous opening weekends, and then you get like 70% drop offs in week
yeah,
two, which never used to happen because that show's great. Your core fan base turned up on week one, and then no one else did. But then we had like your Oppenheimers, your Barbies, your Top Guns, where people just kept coming back, or people were hearing, "Hey, have you heard about this film? Yeah, great. Can we watch it at home? No, you can't. You will see it at home in 6 months or go to the cinema now." My biggest concern with Amazon is this, where I forgot the name of it. A horror film came out like a week ago and it's on digital a week after. And if you weren't in a rush, people know, oh, we can grab that online. That's on our dodgy Fire Stick, or that's on a torrent website, or that's on this place. So a concern with the streaming service running the film side of it is they need to. I know they will say they don't want the money, but wouldn't it sound better for Bond if they got another $1 billion film compared to
yeah,
yeah, it made 100 mil,
Yeah.
but a gazillion people streamed it for 3 minutes. Like, great, no one cares about the streaming total. They care about the actual money side of it because that's showing the audience turned up, and that's something I'm like is that for me, you've got to protect it. People have to go to the cinema because James Bond's an event, especially here in the UK. Like
yeah,
everyone's going to go to the next Bond film. Of course they are. Like there's a new Bond film coming out. Great. You know, not toward the end of COVID, but when No Time to Die came out, that was breaking all the COVID records for us in the UK. And then 2 months later, Spider-Man had the same. It was everyone came out because the three Spider-Men were on screen together. So if you give them a reason to go to the cinema, they'll go. And I think a new Bond film sells itself.
yeah,
Put a popular actor in, someone that people want to see. As you said, you don't have to put these big names around them. You don't have to get Oscar winners as villains this time round.
yeah,
Maybe you want a prestigious name as M or something like that, but put the sequence on the screen, tease something in the trailers, do something with the marketing campaign that isn't just this edgy montage of very pretty looking shots. Show a bit of the action without giving it away. And I think that's something I'm looking forward to is that the Bond has marketed the Craig era very well, but with the new era, evolution, audience habits, and everything else, you need to evolve the marketing. You need
yeah,
to go not all out with trailers, but give them the reason to go to the cinema.
Yeah.
That's a big thing for me, and that's the whole industry that's facing that problem, not just James Bond. But I think again, and these little things where I mentioned earlier that I really hope there's some kind of locked in clauses that Eon have put in for Amazon, like doesn't necessarily have to be British, but it should be British actor. But there's got to be these locked in clauses, right? I just can't. When I spoke about a social that Barbara gave up, I'd be really surprised if she'd have given up and not signed stuff over. Like Lucas bringing in Kathleen Kennedy and Harrison Ford and that. If he wanted his films made, he should have put it locked in, make my three films, not anything else. But he didn't. And I'd like to think that Barbara Broccoli is going to protect the franchise with certain things such as that. Again, we don't know. Amazon's a big company, but if they want to really be taken seriously as a studio for making films, what a better way to start than the first new Bond in 20 years? And what was do people need to watch last Bond film? No, you don't, because he died in that continuity. You've got the freshest possible start
Yeah.
you can have. I guess it then comes down to who they want to bring in to put it together and to be in it. That's the real big one for me.
What new big cinematic films have Amazon done, actually? I don't know that, George.
None.
Right,
That's it.
well,
They
For me,
that's
this
good
is
then, isn't it?
this is their chance
That's
exactly.
good.
to put themselves out there as a cinema
Yeah.
Mm.
making studio. So like obviously James Bond is their marquee site. This is the biggest thing Amazon's got, and it's the envy of other streaming platforms, really.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to settle for it being on the small screen. They will want premieres with celebrities, royal figures, whatever, and the Amazon logo being there, marketed the heck out of it. Like, I can't see that they'll pass on the opportunity to do that. Like you say, there is the fear that they might make it available to stream sooner um, than you'd want, but you'd hope or you'd like them to say in their advertising campaign that you're talking about, George, to say Amazon belongs on the big screen now, and then it's like, the message is you're not going to be seeing James Bond on Prime Video for 6 months. If you want to see this Amazon product, go to your local, see us there, kind of. I
And
just think Bond is too big for them to. They'd be miss. I'm no businessman, but it wouldn't make financial sense to keep it on the small screen to me.
agreed. And I think that's a really good point. I think Universal has the international distribution rights on Bond 26 because when they did
Oh
No
yeah.
Time to Die, was it a two-picture deal?
Right.
So we've got a great gun barrel sequence, which I loved from the Universal thing, and obviously that was in America, but that's going to be something that I can't imagine Universal saying like buy us out. Universal just made Oppenheimer $1 billion. They're doing Odyssey with Nolan again. Like they're one of the studios that have done really well post COVID because they've sorted their division out. But it's things like that Amazon are gonna have to work with somebody at least for one film. But yeah, there's so much possibility. And they said if they make Bond their flagship, directors are going to want to work with them. Nolan almost did at Apple. Apple got down to the final two with Universal. So yeah, there's things like that that I think the industry needs to learn from it, and certainly Amazon. And I guess it's going to be like a wild adventure until we do get the next few updates.
It's big news. It's come quite suddenly. It's caught us off guard. Fans have reacted well, fans have reacted badly. But it's the first bit of news. There will be more to come. There will be more developments where we understand better how Amazon are doing this. For me, you guys all said hopeful. I'm hopeful. I'm also very, very excited. It's the injection of life and the reinvigoration of the franchise that I think is needed because I did feel it was fizzling out a little bit in terms of creative ideas and the writing and all that. So I feel very, very positive about it. I'll be honest, and that might not be a popular view amongst fans, but I think this is where I want Bond to be. I want him to be taken notice of. I want him to be marketed. I want him to be massive, and I want him to be back with a bang. And I'm incredibly excited. But talking about it, this is just us talking about it. The conversation will continue now. We are going to see so much happening on social media and on the news. It's great to see Bond on the news again. Things are going to start, really gathering momentum and speed now. And whatever our stance, I just think it'd be great for just to take a chance on this and get on board this amazing new, exciting new era for the franchise, where you might have a few suspicions, you might be a bit trepidatious about where it's going, but we're about to start the journey. Whatever we get that comes out, it's going to be a very exciting journey, at least now, with loads of talking points, loads of things that are going to make us love the old films and make us appreciate what we've got, loads of things that will make us fantasize about what we're going to get. It's a great, exciting time for me. Yes, it's uncertain, but that's where most excitement comes, isn't it? So this is my plea for fans to get on board and enjoy the journey to Bond 26 because it has just taken a massive step forwards. And this James Bond Will Return series has been waiting for this moment. It had been fizzling away, but now, my word, we're back on track. And how. So yeah, thank you for joining me, especially George, Steve. Thank you for joining us all for this conversation. And obviously continue to check out George's stuff with Cinema Savvy because he doesn't just know his stuff about Bond, but almost everything else as well. So follow George on there. Check out Steve on the news because you might be doing a few items about Bond. Who knows? But yeah, into the new era we go, guys.